It all started with a brunch meant to impress. Smiles rehearsed, cameras rolling. But when Carrie, a popular influencer, shaved the natural hair of Zora, her housekeeper's daughter, without consent, she didn't just cross a line. She lit a fire. What followed was outrage, unraveling partnerships, broken families, and a community forced to confront everything silence had hidden. But this isn't just about a mistake. It's about power, race, repair, and whether true change is even possible when the cameras are off. Can one act of listening be louder than millions of views? Stay with us to witness a story where justice doesn't come viral, but quietly, painfully, and face to face. Carrie had the tripod at the height she liked, the lens a touch above eye level to soften angles, the timer test firing a few seconds of footage so she could check her smile. "Okay, ladies, this is going to be adorable," she said, half to Madison and Kelsey and half to the invisible audience she'd learned to treat as a friend in the room. "Zora, sweetie, come stand right here," she added, tapping a bar stool with a bright, coaxing rhythm. Madison lifted a tumbler toward the camera and chimed in, "Glow up day," while Kelsey pinched her own curls and told the lens, "We love a transformation moment." Zora hovered just inside the frame, holding the hem of her t-shirt like it was the only solid thing in a place that kept shifting. Angela, who had come in to collect plates and keep the chaos from staining the counters, paused when she heard Carrie's tone, the honeyed one she used when she wanted compliance wrapped in praise. "It'll be quick," Carrie promised, turning the screen so everyone could see themselves on it. "You'll feel brand new, babe. Think of how fun it'll be to show your friends." The music on the iPad was already cued to a chorus that made everything feel like a celebration, as if the decision had been made before anyone said a word. Zora's first "no" was barely a sound, a syllable that carried more breath than consonant, and Carrie answered it with a reassuring giggle, as if they were sharing a private joke. "She's nervous," Carrie told the camera with a warm shrug, "but trust me, this is going to be so cute." The second "no" scraped its way out, steadier, shaped by the kind of fear that knew itself, and Kelsey blurted, "Girl, don't be shy. You're going to slay." Madison leaned in and whispered to Zora, "You'll thank us later, I swear," while her eyes flicked to the screen to check her own reflection. Carrie's hand touched Zora's shoulder, too light to bruise, heavy enough to anchor, guiding her onto the stool. Angela shifted her weight in the doorway. Dish towel looped over her fingers and said, "Miss Caroline," a question more than a challenge. Carrie smiled at her, practiced and bright. "We're just helping her out a little," she said, the phrase "just helping" landing like a lid on a pot. Zora's third "no" arrived and hit the chorus on the iPad, swallowed by a beat that pretended consent could be edited in later. Carrie picked up the clippers and held them in frame for a second, the way she had seen stylists do in reels that racked up millions of views. "First, we tidy the edges," she told the camera, bringing the hum to life. "You're safe, honey, I've got you," she said to Zora, not quite asking, not quite telling. Madison clasped her hands like a cheerleader who had learned sincerity from television. "This is content, baby," Kelsey laughed. "It's going to break the internet." Zora gripped her knees where no one could see and tried to breathe in the rhythm of the song so the beating in her chest wouldn't leak into her face. Angela's mouth opened again, then closed. The room had a script now, and she understood that any line she spoke would be cut for time. Carrie lifted a section of hair between two fingers, and for a heartbeat she seemed to hesitate, searching Zora's eyes for permission she didn't plan to wait for. "Trust me," Carrie repeated, soft as sugar, and settled her other hand more firmly on Zora's shoulder, a gentle pressure that said the decision had happened already. The clippers were a low, steady vibration against her wrist, a tool that made everything look easy on camera. When the blade met the first curl, the strand separated like a promise undone. "Yes, see," Carrie gushed for the audience, leaning into the lens with a grin built to be paused and screenshotted. Madison squealed, too loud and too late to be truly spontaneous. "Oh my God, I'm obsessed," she said, and Kelsey added, "Look at the shape, so clean." Zora's throat tightened around another word that didn't get out, and her eyes fixed on the island countertop because the glossy surface didn't flinch. Carrie angled Zora's head with 2 fingers beneath her chin, like posing a doll for the good side. "Just a little more," she murmured. "We're just freshening you up." She snipped and buzzed in short, confident motions, moving as if the camera were grading her technique. A few stray hairs landed on Zora's wrist and stuck there. She brushed them off like something that burned. Angela took a step closer, without crossing the tile seam, the dish towel wound tight as rope between her hands. "Miss Caroline," she tried again, voice lower now, "maybe we ask—" Carrie glanced up, the bright smile still pasted on, and said, "I promise. It's fine." To the camera she cooed, "She's being so brave," converting Zora's silence into a trait that made sense on a caption. The laughter kept rising and falling in tidy arcs, as if cued, filling the spaces where Zora might have spoken. Carrie talked about frizz and shape and confidence, moving the clippers with assurance that played well in a sped-up cut. "Imagine the before and after," Kelsey said, picturing the split screen, the text overlay, the brand tags. "We should put a sparkle filter," Madison added, and they both laughed at a joke about going viral that had the taste of victory even before a single comment. Zora blinked and held the air inside as if it were a secret. Tiny hairs collected at the base of her neck, a prickling itch she refused to scratch because it would be one more thing she couldn't control. Angela looked at Zora, not at the screen, seeing the tremor in the girl's jaw that the camera's front lens didn't capture. "Sweetheart," Angela said, soft, almost to herself, and the word floated a few feet, then fell between them, unheard or unwanted. Carrie lowered the clippers to buzz another section and arranged her voice into the kind of reassurance that photographs well. "Almost done," she said, the phrase meant to soothe, not to ask. "You're going to be so happy when you see it." Carrie leaned back to examine her work in the live preview, tilting the phone to catch the angle that made everything look intentional. "Turn a little." "Good," she coached, lightly turning Zora's chin again, keeping her arm in frame as if the helping hand were the star. Madison reached to dust imaginary hair from Zora's shoulder, then pulled her hand back when Angela's gaze caught it, the kind of look a mother gives when words might start a war. "We should keep it playful," Kelsey stage whispered, clapping once for emphasis. "Like summer reset." Carrie laughed, bright but not entirely focused, hearing an echo of something she hadn't let herself notice. The quiet that had settled on Zora like a blanket too heavy for a warm day. "Smile for me?" Carrie asked, and when the smile didn't come, she filled the space herself, turning to camera. "Some of us take a minute to love change, and that's okay." She tapped the screen to lock focus on her own face for the outro, then panned to Zora for the reveal, narrating the transformation as if naming it made it real. Angela's hands tightened around the towel until the terry cloth thinned, and she swallowed what her body knew. Some lines, once crossed, don't lead anywhere you want to go back from. Carrie clicked the red square, and the music wound down in a tidy tail, the last beat smoothing over whatever didn't fit the narrative. "We got it," she said, breathless, like she'd just finished a workout, and she held the phone up for a quick swipe through the takes. "This cut is going to live rent-free in my head," Kelsey joked, looking for a way to say she'd just watched a magic trick instead of a boundary ignored. Madison peered in. "The lighting loves you," she told Carrie, and then, as an afterthought, "Zora looks neat." Zora slid off the stool and faced the same square foot of tile, steadying herself with a palm on the counter, the tiny hairs hitching a ride along her wrist again. Angela didn't move any closer. Some part of her had learned the cost of stepping between an act and its audience. Carrie selected the peppiest 20 seconds, thumb decisive as a metronome, added a caption, "Sometimes confidence is a cutaway," and tapped the arrow. The screen blinked, a clean, happy interface reporting progress. When it flashed, uploading, it wasn't just the video that rose to the cloud. Angela's stomach climbed with it, a cold ascent she couldn't stop. A hot, righteous silence swelled in the room, and with an inevitability everyone would feel, the certainty settled that no one in that kitchen would walk away unchanged. The first wave looked like love. Hearts stacked, pink and harmless, racking up by the hundreds under a caption about confidence being one cut away. Madison texted a screenshot to the group chat, already at 12K in 8 min, and Kelsey replied with a string of fire emojis and a prediction that they'd wake up on a bigger brand's radar by morning. "Told you," Carrie murmured, forcing a grin she wanted to feel. Then a different kind of notification appeared, fast and thin, like rain before a storm. "Did she say no?" one comment asked. "Play with your own hair," another wrote. "Consent is not a filter," a third posted, and when Carrie tapped to see the profile, she found a high school teacher who had stitched the video and circled the first "no." The stitch spun into a second stitch, a cosmetologist breaking down why cutting someone against their will wasn't a makeover. "It's being misread," Kelsey said, refreshing for something friendlier. "They don't know you." Madison argued for turning off stitches. Carrie flicked through settings, but left them on, convinced that context would defend her. A DM from a long-time follower blinked open. "I love you, but you're wrong on this. I'm saying it in private because I've learned from you, and I hope you'll learn now." Carrie typed, erased, typed again. "Thank you for your feedback," she wrote, sending it with a heart, trying to steady the thing that had started to tilt. By early afternoon, the tilt became a slide. Someone uploaded a raw cut, not Carrie's polish, but the footage she hadn't posted, recorded on a guest phone and shared to a private Discord before spilling into public. It was 9 seconds long and it was everything. Zora's first no, then the second with its edge, then the third swallowed by a chorus. The frame shook as if the person filming had realized too late that they were part of a mistake. "This is the video," a caption declared on the re-uploads, and in the comments the tone changed from snark to something with weight. "We hear her," a mother wrote. "My daughter has been sent home for braids. This is not harmless." A stylist posted a screen of state policy. A civil rights account threaded the Crown Act, naming the harm plane. "Please take it down," a message begged. And next to it another said, "We're reporting." The emojis turned to paragraphs, paragraphs to citations, citations to sentences that had more verbs than exclamation points. "Assault," someone claimed. "Humiliation," said another. "Child," said many. When Carrie opened her email to escape the noise, the inbox refreshed into a different kind of quiet, administrative, final. Ava Price, the partnerships manager who had once sent Carrie flowers with a contract, wrote 3 lines that did not blink. "Caroline, effective immediately, we're terminating campaigns under Section 8, Values Alignment. We'll process final payments per deliverables received. Please remove all tags by EOD. No exclamation marks, no emojis, no euphemisms." Carrie called straight to voicemail. She texted, "Ava, can we talk?" and watched the bubble stay grey. Madison attempted pep talk math. "You still have 5 active deals," but refreshed, then swallowed. "Okay, maybe 3, she corrected, craning to see over Carrie's shoulder as a second email chimed in from another brand, almost a copy and paste of Ava's. "They're overreacting," Kelsey insisted, pacing, offering new captions that framed it as a teachable moment. "You say you made a mistake, you sent a Zora, you commit to learning, boom." Carrie nodded because nodding was a task. She opened notes, title, Apology, Human. Bullet 1, Name harm. Bullet 2, No excuses. Bullet 3, Concrete action. She wrote a draft that sounded like a blog post and then deleted half of it when Ethan walked in. He stood in the doorway to her office, reading her face before he read the screen. "What's the plan?" he asked, as if they were back in a pitch room, as if a crisis were a campaign with a calendar. "I'll go live," Carrie said. "No edits, no sponsorships. I'll say I hear her, I'm learning, She trailed off, the list long and shapeless. "You need to say you were wrong," Ethan replied, not unkind, just tired. "You need to say why, you know?" He glanced down at his phone. It lit with a text he didn't show her. "I'll sit off camera," he added, attempting solidarity, but in the same breath he said, "I'm going to stay at the hotel tonight. The PR head from Corey called. They're worried about spillover on my accounts. It's cleaner if we create space." Carrie stared at him. "You're leaving to keep your job," she said, and heard her own voice sharpening. "I'm leaving because you didn't stop," he answered, and the room absorbed that difference. "Write the apology like you mean it," he said, setting his keycard down as if that were a reasonable thing to leave in a life. "Don't look at me when you write it." He picked up a small suitcase she hadn't registered at his feet and crossed the hall. His steps were normal, the way people walk when they're moving from one meeting to another. The door clicked. She rewrote the first line to include the word sorry, the kind that doesn't take any words back, and the sentence shook when she tried to hold it steady. Down the coast, Eleanor pulled the pearl studs from her ears as if shedding an argument she hadn't yet had, and drove without calling ahead. During the red lights, she rehearsed the ways she had failed to notice, things Angela had not said over coffee in the kitchen, the favor she should have offered and hadn't, the reflex to host instead of help. Bridgeport's cross streets came back to her hands like a pattern she'd once known. She parked half a block away, not wanting to appear like a raid, and walked until she saw Angela on the stoop, elbows on knees, phone face down beside her. "Mrs. Whitmore," Angela said out of habit, standing halfway and then sitting again when Eleanor lifted a palm. "Please," Eleanor answered, and with a small, workmanlike grunt, sat on the same step, knees not quite touching. For a minute they breathed like neighbors instead of employer and employee. And then Eleanor spoke the only sentence that didn't sound like she was auditioning for grace. "I'm sorry," she said, looking not at the house or the street, but at Angela's hand, which had tightened around itself. "I should have seen it happening sooner. I should have—" She stopped. The rest belonged to explanations, and explanations had learned to sound like weather, as if no one had chosen anything. Angela didn't offer to make it easier. She had no interest in comfort that couldn't hold a weight. "She said no 3 times, Angela replied, each word measured, not to hurt, but to name. "I was in the doorway." Eleanor nodded, as if taking dictation. "I saw the video," she said. "I didn't need the raw cut to know the first one was enough." Angela stared at the tiny nick on her forefinger she hadn't noticed earlier, the way a body keeps an inventory when it can't fix the big thing. "Zora won't go to school tomorrow," she continued, almost administrative. "I'm going to file. I'm not asking you to agree, I'm telling you." Eleanor nodded again. The yes belonged to a different ledger. "Do you want water?" she asked after a moment, useless but sincere. "No." "Do you want me to?" "No." They let the refusal stand between them like a rumor that had finally told the truth. A man from 2 houses down waved. Angela waved back. The life of the block passed. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said once more, not to fill the silence but to keep it company. No cameras, no script. In that interval, grief and dignity shared the step, recognized each other, and didn't look away. Zora learned the architecture of her own house by avoiding mirrors. She memorized which door frames flashed a blur of glass and how to angle her shoulder past the hall console so the gilt edge didn't catch her face. In the bathroom, she brushed her teeth staring at the faucet, counting the seconds in her head because the app that once made it a game now felt like an audience. Angela tried to keep routines intact. Cereal poured, backpack checked, a soft, "We can take a day if you need," but routine had sharp corners. "I'm fine," Zora said, because the word was short and didn't ask for proof. Angela's eyes took a full inventory anyway, noting the way Zora's fingers hovered near the back of her head and then retreated, the way she chose the hoodie with the longest hood strings. At the door, Angela reached to adjust the cloth band Zora had placed as a placeholder, then stopped herself. "You tell me what you want me to do," she said instead. Zora nodded, grateful for instructions that arrived without touch. On the bus, she took the seat by the window and let the view arrange itself into a safe blur, willing the day to pass like a paragraph she could skim. At school, the first bell pulled everyone into their lanes, and Zora kept to the edges like a new student. She moved with economy. Locker, binder, class, each action stripped of anything extra. A group of girls at the far end fell abruptly silent when she turned the corner, then resumed a beat too late, like actors remembering their lines. Zora's body knew how to become small. It had learned the trick early, in classrooms where teachers called her name only for roll. She made it almost to second period before Coach Rivera intercepted her at the junction, where the hallway always smelled faintly of floor wax and pencil shavings. "Walk with me?" the coach asked, matching pace, no hand on the shoulder, no pity in the face. Zora followed, braced for the kind of pep talk that makes adults feel helpful. Instead, Rivera set a small, wrapped bundle on a bench and slid it toward her. "A delivery," she said, mouth quirking, "from the world's least intimidating secret society." Zora blinked. "I didn't order anything," she replied, and Rivera nodded. "I know, they did." A pause, long enough for choice to be real. "You don't have to open it now," Rivera added, standing up so Zora wouldn't feel watched. "I'll be right over there if the knot wins the first round." Zora untied the strings slowly because her hands had developed a new tremor, the kind that showed up for small work and hid when there was real danger. Inside lay a folded square of blue, soft, saturated, exactly the color she never picked because it called attention. She lifted it, and as the cloth unfurled, she saw the edges stitched with names in threads that didn't match. Lila, Noor, Janelle, Pry, Maya, and tiny initials where the space had run out. A quick note sat underneath in handwriting that jumped lines. "From the Diversity Club, we don't know you yet. We want to. If you don't want us to, we'll listen anyway." Zora put the note in her pocket as if it were breakable. She placed the scarf over her head, the way she'd seen mothers in church tie their daughters' hair, but the knot came out crooked, slipping to one side like it had a mind to escape. She tried again, swallowed a growl, and tried once more. Each attempt was a small battle with gravity and doubt. Rivera, still across the hall, pretended to study a bulletin board, then came back with a practiced clumsiness. "Can I show you a trick and then step away?" she asked, palms up, waiting for a nod. When the nod came, Rivera guided only the fabric, not Zora's head, narrating so Zora could repeat it without help. "Cross here, twist here and tuck. You can leave the tail loose if you like. It's your call." The third knot held. It wasn't perfect, which turned out to be a relief. The slight tilt made it hers. "You don't have to love it today," Rivera said. "Just let it do its job." Zora thanked her without meeting her eyes, and the coach accepted that as complete. On the way to class, Zora noticed small adjustments in other people, as if the scarf had changed their focus. A boy from science offered her the seat by the window without a flourish. A girl she didn't know dropped a pack of gum on the desk and nudged it toward her as if she'd meant to leave it there all along. Not everyone softened. A whisper rose behind her like a mosquito. "She's milking it," and Zora felt the heat climb her throat but kept her pencil moving. The math teacher, who had once remarked that Zora's curls were wild but cute, kept her hands to herself and stuck to eigenvalues. At lunch, when Zora hesitated at the threshold, a trio from the club who had stitched their names into the hem didn't beckon with pity. They made space at their table and kept their conversation normal, leaving room for her to approach or pass. She approached, plate steady, sat, and let their stories wash past until she found the courage to ask, "What's Noor short for?" The question opened 5 minutes of talk about family names. For the first time since the brunch, Zora allowed a laugh to reach the surface, small and dry, but audible. By last period, the scarf felt like an object in the room instead of a spotlight. Zora walked through the hall and counted the number of times someone made eye contact without then flinching. 3, then 5, then she stopped counting because measuring every moment had become its own exhaustion. Angela texted a simple check-in, "How are you holding up?" and Zora typed, "I'm okay for now." She left out the qualifiers because sometimes brevity was a truce. After the final bell, she ducked into the library for 10 minutes she hadn't asked permission for, sat at a corner table, and took the note from her pocket. She traced each stitched name with her finger, slower than necessary, making a game of guessing whose handwriting belonged to whom. The librarian, who had once been strict about snacks, placed a wrapped granola bar on the edge of Zora's table without comment and walked away. Zora didn't eat it. She liked the idea that she could. On the bus home, a boy in the seat ahead turned around, opened his mouth like he had a joke, then shut it and said, "Do you want the window?" She shook her head. "I have enough view today," she said, surprising herself with the sound of her own wit. He nodded as if she'd said something wise. At home, before she took off her shoes, Angela looked up from the counter and searched Zora's face for weather. "How was it?" she asked, not pressing. Zora touched the scarf briefly, not for reassurance, but as if to introduce it. "Coach gave me, well, the club gave me this." They stitched their names. Angela stepped close enough to see the uneven edges and smiled the smile she kept for things made by real hands. "Do you want me to learn the knot with you?" she asked. Zora considered, then said, "Maybe tomorrow." And Angela accepted the boundary like a gift. They ate in a way that resembled normal, 2 forks, stories about other things, and only once did the silence turn heavy when a notification flashed on Angela's phone with a headline that smelled like opinion. Angela turned it face down and changed the subject by asking if Zora still remembered the bedtime rhyme from kindergarten. "The one with the buses," Zora said, and they both recited one line and let it trail off. Later in her room, Zora stood facing the wall to remove the scarf so the closet mirror couldn't misbehave. She folded it carefully, edge to edge, placed it on the dresser, and texted Rivera a single sentence that felt like a whole paragraph: "Thank you for making space." Night brought the part of the day when noise has to pick a side. Either it slams into the dark or it taps lightly until someone lets it in. Zora lay on her side with her phone under the pillow, not to hide it, but to muffle the reflex to check it every 3 minutes. The first message that didn't cut arrived after 9. 3 lines from a girl who had laughed at Zora's braids in 7th grade and called them heavy. "I didn't understand," the message read. "I'm learning. If you want, I'll sit with you." Zora stared at the screen a long time, measuring the distance between then and now, skeptical of sudden conversion and still hungry for the kind that makes life bearable. She didn't reply. Not yet. She pressed and held on the bubble, tapped save, scrolled back up to read it again, as if repetition could prove its weight. The words held. She set the phone on the nightstand like something fragile that might roll off, and only then did she let the day break open. The pillow caught what she had refused to share with the bus window, the lunch table, the library, her mother. She did not sob. She let the water work quietly until her breath steadied. When she finally slept, the scarf was folded where she'd left it, and the message waited, still there, still 3 lines, still the first one that didn't hurt. Gary sat at the edge of her bed, phone trembling in one hand, and the other clutching a script she'd rewritten 5 times. She'd watched 3 different apology videos that morning, one from a singer, one from a CEO, one from a makeup influencer who cried on cue and took notes on phrasing, posture, tone. Don't make it about you. Don't get defensive. Keep the energy low but sincere. She practiced in the mirror with the camera reversed, nodding when her expression looked neutral, deleting when her voice quivered in the wrong places. She had styled herself to look undone, hair in a loose bun, hoodie instead of a blouse, the kind of performance the internet liked because it felt vulnerable but still tidy. When she finally pressed "Go Live," the comments came before she even spoke. "Why are you wearing makeup? Where's the girl? You heard her say no." Carrie cleared her throat. "I want to start by saying I'm sorry," she began, but the words didn't lift. They dropped out of her mouth like something dead. The chat didn't wait. "This isn't an apology, it's a performance." I stopped filming and listened for once. It's not about perukes, it's about power. The screen glitched, buffering in frozen frames of her own face, trying not to flinch. The live ended before she meant to end it. She didn't restart it. In the aftermath, silence didn't feel like peace, it felt like exile. The notifications slowed, then surged again as reaction videos took hold, commentary channels dissecting her tone, former fans posting duets with red circles around her expressions, advocacy accounts referencing the Crown Act and legal terminology that made her ears ring. She wanted to call someone, but the group chat with Madison and Kelsey was eerily still. Her messages had blue check marks, no replies. "Let's ride this out," had been the last thing Madison said before disappearing into the digital mist. Kelsey had posted a story about self-care that didn't tag Carrie or reference anything. Carrie scrolled through their profiles, shocked at how quickly distance could be styled. She typed, "Hey, can we talk?" twice and deleted it both times. In the background, Ethan walked past with a duffel bag and didn't stop to ask how it went. He closed the guest room door behind him with the finality of someone choosing silence. For a long time, Carrie just sat there, eyes locked on the live-ended screen, heart galloping for no reason she could defend. The worst part wasn't the backlash, it was the realization that nothing she said mattered anymore. The narrative had outgrown her. It had taken on its own voice, one louder than hers, one not interested in nuance. And maybe that was fair. Maybe she had surrendered the right to be heard when she ignored Zora's "no" 3 times. That thought made her stomach clench. She walked into the kitchen and stood in front of the fridge, staring at it like it might offer a solution. There was orange juice she didn't remember buying, a half-used oat milk, a Tupperware labeled Angela Mon. It had been 3 days since Angela left without a word. Not angry, not loud, just done. Carrie had wanted to chase her, to explain something, though she didn't know what, but her feet never moved. She told herself to give it space, but the silence only widened. Her own house felt like it had expelled her from the inside, like every drawer she opened was waiting to judge her. Even the stairs creaked louder now. She wandered into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub without turning the light on. When she finally stood and faced the mirror, what stared back at her looked neither sorry nor cruel, just blank. That emptiness scared her. She splashed water on her face and caught her reflection mid-motion, the distortion startling her into a laugh she didn't recognize. Was this what shame looked like up close? Not tears or rants, but a quiet flattening of self. She removed her hoodie and stood in her undershirt, skin pale under the fluorescent light. There was a sharp red mark across her shoulder, pressure from the phone tripod she'd leaned against too long. Every part of her body held evidence of performance, and now it all felt like props from a show no one wanted to watch. She opened the drawer for cotton pads and found a compact she hadn't used in months, flipped it open to a mirror too small to lie. In that tiny frame, she looked like a stranger. The version of herself curated for the feed had vanished, and what remained was a woman with nothing left to manage. She walked down the hallway barefoot, phone still in hand, hoping the silence would offer a cue she could follow. But the house gave her nothing. The hallway, usually humming with voice memos and alarms, was just blank space. She passed the room where she used to shoot her Sunday segments, still half lit from the afternoon, ring light unplugged but standing like a ghost. She stepped inside just to feel something familiar, and stood in the center. She raised the phone again, more from instinct than intent, opened the front-facing camera, and stared. She could film, she could cry, admit guilt, explain her growth. But who would believe it now? Who should? She lowered the phone. Behind her, a notification pinged. Another comment. She didn't read it. She sat cross-legged on the floor instead, leaning back until her head touched the leg of the stool where Zora had sat just days earlier. She closed her eyes, not to rest, but to try remembering when she'd last spoken to someone who wasn't on screen. For the first time in years, the house felt too large. Not luxurious, not aspirational, just big and echoing, like a version of her own voice that couldn't find its way home. The refrigerator hummed faintly somewhere behind the walls. A draft slipped under a door and vanished. Carrie opened the Notes app, not to write, but to stare at a blank page that asked nothing of her. She tried to type a new apology, something not for public eyes, something maybe meant only for Zora or Angela, but the words wouldn't come. Every sentence started with I and ended in silence. She pressed delete again and again, until the page was as bare as the one in her head. She stood and returned to the bathroom, rinsed her face once more, this time with both hands, and let the water trail down to her neck. She dried herself slowly, methodically, like it was the only task she could still get right. When she looked up again, the mirror hadn't changed, but she had. It wasn't clarity, it wasn't peace, but it was something just shy of truth. And when she walked back to the center of the house, the space around her didn't speak. It simply watched, as if waiting for her to become someone it could speak to again. When the school reached out to propose a restorative circle, Angela didn't say yes right away. She listened to the administrator fumble through language meant to sound neutral: healing, open space, opportunity for reflection, and responded with silence, long enough to make him sweat. Then she asked for conditions: mediation, not moderation, a licensed psychologist in the room, no cameras, no PR, and no one allowed to record a second of it. And if anything came out of that circle, if any apology dared to become action, then it would require measurable, tangible outcomes: scholarships, trainings, community funds. The vice principal tried to assure her the school supported accountability, but Angela's nod was curt. "Then you'll sign on paper," she said, and that was that. The day of the circle, she wore her Sunday earrings and held Zora's hand without gripping it. Carrie arrived alone, makeup minimal, not for aesthetic, but because she didn't trust her own eyes to hold still. She had read about circles, about sitting at the same level, about the discomfort of being seen without speaking. But reading is theory. Sitting in a room where you are not in control of your story is something else entirely. When the chairs formed a half moon in the auditorium, Carrie placed her hands in her lap and waited without rehearsing. Zora didn't speak first. That task went to the facilitator, a black woman with short grey curls who introduced herself simply as Marcia and explained the rules: listening without interruption, no response unless invited, and no hierarchy in truth. She invited each person to say their name and how they came to be here, not their titles, not their affiliations. "Just who you are today," she said. When it came to Carrie, she paused. "I'm Carrie," she said, voice catching. "I'm here because I made a choice that harmed someone. And I want to understand the weight of it, even if I can't undo it." No one clapped, no one nodded. It wasn't a performance. Zora sat between her mother and Rivera, who offered presence, not protection. When it was her turn, Zora hesitated, then said, "I'm Zora. I didn't choose to be here, but I know why I am." Her voice was thin but not brittle. The air didn't break. Angela looked at her with something between pride and sorrow. The circle breathed her words in, slowly. The stories started small. One mother talked about her daughter being sent home in second grade for distracting hair. Another about her son's dreadlocks being cut by a teacher to help with hygiene. Each person added a thread, weaving a tapestry of quiet, systemic erasure of how black children are taught early that their natural state is something to manage, to edit, to perform. Zora listened, her head low, her scarf tied differently today, tucked close. When Marcia finally asked if she wanted to speak again, Zora didn't hesitate. "People touch my hair my whole life," she said, slow and deliberate. "They'd say it was pretty or wild or too much. Sometimes they pulled it like I was an object. Sometimes they meant well, but it didn't matter. I didn't ask. It was mine." She looked directly at Carrie then. "I said no, that should have been the end of it." Carrie didn't blink. She didn't nod either. She just held the words as if they had mass, as if they might bruise if dropped. Carrie didn't defend herself. That surprised her most. She had come in prepared with explanations, not excuses, but context, intentions. But when she heard Zora say, "It was mine," something collapsed in her chest, not defensively, not from guilt, from recognition. She thought of all the times she had used someone else's image, story, or presence for content. Times it worked, times no one complained, times she told herself it was harmless. Now, sitting in this circle, her silence wasn't self-protection. It was acknowledgement. She wanted to say, "I didn't see it then," but that would still center her. Instead, she pressed her palms together and kept listening. One father spoke next, recounting the moment his niece had her braids mocked by a substitute teacher and came home refusing to ever wear them again. "She was 7, he said, and she already knew how to disappear." The room didn't shift in temperature, but something in it deepened. The circle became not just about Carrie's act, but about a lineage of being dismissed, disrespected, unprotected. Marcia waited a full minute before speaking again. Then she asked, "Carrie, what are you taking with you from this?" Carrie looked at Zora, then at Angela. She took a breath, then another. "I came thinking I needed to say something, but what I need is to stop thinking that words are the fix." I didn't just hurt Zora. I confirmed something the world had already been telling her, that she didn't own herself, that her voice could be muted if I had a good enough caption. That's not an accident. That's a choice. My choice. The sentence hung in the air. No one clapped. No one consoled. And that was right. Zora's face didn't soften, but she didn't look away. She traced the hem of her scarf again, as if marking it with new thread. The circle closed, not with resolution, but with recognition. Everyone stood at their own pace. Angela hugged no one, but her arm around Zora as they left was its own benediction. Carrie remained seated a few seconds longer, unsure of whether she should thank anyone or simply exit. She chose silence. Outside the room, the world resumed. Bells rang, phones buzzed, but the circle stayed behind like a ring left on skin. That night, Carrie sat at her kitchen table and tried to remember the sound of Zora's voice when she said, "It was mine." She didn't cry. She didn't post. She didn't film herself journaling about what she had learned. She just sat, palms down, letting the echo of the circle fill the spaces that used to belong to her image. Listening, truly listening, made her dizzy, not from guilt, but from gravity. Real listening, she realized, rearranged things. And now, she had to live in a house that finally knew what had been missing. Angela didn't announce it with drama. She reached calmly into her bag during a meeting with the school's legal liaison and placed a small silver pen drive on the table. "There's more than the video," she said quietly, "not to impress or to intimidate, but to correct the record." What played next in the room was not filtered, cut, or synced to music. It was raw audio from a phone left recording on the edge of a kitchen island during the brunch. The voices were familiar, but the tone was different than what Carrie had allowed the world to hear. "Just shave it already," came Madison's unmistakable laugh, her voice pitched with excitement. "It'll blow up, trust." Then Kelsey, amused and reckless. "She's stiff. Give it that reality show drama." Laughter followed, layered, ugly. The footage didn't just implicate Carrie, it revealed the entire event as premeditated content. No misunderstanding, no misstep. This was a plan wrapped in hashtags. The room fell silent when it ended. The school's attorney scribbled notes. The facilitator looked down at her hands. And Angela, never raising her voice, added, "We all knew she said no, but now you can hear who didn't care." That silence, finally, was not just awkward, it was damning. The recording leaked that evening. No one claimed to have sent it to the press, and Angela didn't need to. The press already watched her feed, already sensed the tension that swelled behind every new development. The article dropped just past 8 p.m. You are complete with transcription, timelines and quotes from legal scholars about consent, coercion, and the implications of state-level protections like the Crown Act. The backlash re-erupted, sharper and more targeted. Carrie's team, or what was left of it, issued a 2-line statement attempting to condemn any language taken out of context. But context this time was not Carrie's to define. The public listened, compared, reshared. Influencers who had stayed neutral now posted threads, calling out not just Carrie, but the entire culture that turned pain into performance. "You can't curate accountability," one tweet read. "There's no filter for consent." Carrie tried to remain composed, watching the metrics burn like a house she couldn't exit. She wrote 10 drafts of a new statement. She didn't send any. For the first time, she understood that her silence didn't read as strategic. It read as hollow. Still, guilt has its own hunger, and Carrie, starving for redemption, mistook movement for healing. She called her assistant and ordered premium synthetic wigs in shades of deep black and honey brown, textured, natural, with lace fronts and silk parts. She contacted a videographer and pitched the idea, a donation event, a quiet drop-off at a local black-owned salon, all under embargo until the time was right. "It'll show the work, not the words," she said. The assistant hesitated. "Carrie, are you sure this is the move?" But Carrie had already drafted captions. "Healing starts with hair. Let's give back where we took." She believed the right gesture could reverse the tide. She didn't see that the tide had stopped listening. The following evening, she arrived at the salon with a trunk full of wigs, a camera crew, and an idea of how redemption should look. She didn't ask permission. She assumed the door would open. Angela stood on the threshold of the community salon, like a sentry. Zora was inside, seated in a corner, talking softly with a transadera from Newark. Angela didn't raise her voice when Carrie approached, didn't flinch at the presence of the camera, didn't even blink at the carefully curated bags Carrie carried like offerings. "This isn't a set," she said, blocking the door with her body alone. Her voice was gentle, final, and carried more authority than any security detail. "Not here, not today," Carrie faltered, her mouth halfway to a line she didn't believe in. She looked to the camera operator, then to the bags. "They're for the girls," she managed. "For the community." Angela stepped forward, just enough to remove any doubt. "Then leave them, quietly, without the lighting crew, without the captions." Carrie's hands stayed frozen around the handles. She couldn't let go. She couldn't move forward either. Angela didn't repeat herself. After a full minute that stretched too long, Carrie gave the bags to the assistant and turned around. The camera never rolled. Not one frame captured the exchange, because that was the point. The drive home felt different. The GPS still worked, the roads were the same, but Carrie no longer knew what arrival meant. She sat in the car after parking, staring at the dashboard like it held some code she hadn't cracked. Her fingers hovered over her phone, half-drafting an apology post she knew wouldn't matter. She couldn't tell whether she was chasing forgiveness or fleeing from visibility. The metrics didn't comfort her now. The silence of her former friends didn't sting. It numbed. For years, she had known what to do: reposition, reframe, redirect. But now her hands felt empty, not idle, useless. She couldn't even perform service without contaminating it with intent. Angela's voice echoed in her head. Not a set. That phrase worked its way into her bones like a warning. Her brand had always been built on transformation, but this time, no glow-up would suffice. What she needed couldn't be styled, couldn't be lit correctly, couldn't be polished into a reel. It had to come from a place she'd never built from before: surrender. Back in her house, she didn't go live. She didn't draft a new campaign. She didn't unpack the remaining bags of wigs. Instead, she sat on the floor of her living room, where she used to stage morning yoga routines for content. She didn't light candles. She didn't open her laptop. She just sat, hands resting palm up, as if waiting for something to land. But nothing did. Not peace, not clarity, just silence. For the first time since the spiral began, she didn't try to control the narrative. She didn't even try to explain it to herself. And in that raw absence, she found the one thing she'd never dared to allow: stillness. Angela's rejection hadn't come with rage or spectacle. It had come with truth, quiet and unmistakable. That truth sent Carrie tumbling down a staircase she didn't know she was on, not physically, not visibly. But inside, all the plans had fallen away, all the performance stripped. What remained was a woman with nothing left to offer but an open hand, empty of anything that could be monetized. A woman who, for the first time, had no plan, only silence. Eleanor became a bridge before anyone asked her to. There were no announcements, no digital statements, no photo ops. Just quiet lunches at a corner diner in Bridgeport, where she met Angela on Thursdays and never ordered the same thing twice. They spoke in the rhythm of women who had once been on opposite ends of an invisible line, but now shared more than just proximity to the same wound. Eleanor came not with guilt or apology. Angela had no appetite for that, but with curiosity and consistency. Once she asked what Zora liked to read, and 3 days later an unmarked envelope was left at Angela's front door. Inside were 3 books, one about black girlhood, one about natural hair, and one handwritten, with quotes Eleanor had copied out in neat cursive on index cards. She never signed them. She didn't need to. Zora knew. At the salon, Eleanor visited twice. Once to drop off supplies, once just to sit and listen to stories being braided into strands. "You're not what I expected," one of the transaderas told her. "That makes 2 of us," Eleanor replied, her voice unshaken. She didn't pretend to belong. She simply showed up, again and again. One afternoon, Eleanor stopped by the Whitmore house and found Carrie in the back garden with her laptop open and nothing typed on the screen. It had been a week since the failed donation stunt, a week since Angela's quiet refusal had sent Carrie back into herself. Eleanor didn't scold or soothe. She sat beside her daughter-in-law and watched the wind struggle with the bushes. "Have you written anything?" she asked finally. Carrie shook her head. "I keep starting. Then I hate the sound of my own voice." Eleanor nodded. "That's a good place to begin." Knowing the difference between speaking and deserving to be heard, Carrie didn't argue. "What do I do now?" she asked, and Eleanor answered the way only someone who had lived longer and lost more could. "Admitting isn't dying. It's being born again. But don't expect anyone to hold you through it." It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was meant to be true. Carrie stared at the blank document and whispered, "But I don't know who I'm becoming." Eleanor touched her hand briefly. "Then stay quiet until you do, but not too quiet to learn." Ethan returned 2 days later, not to stay, but to collect more shirts. He moved with the detachment of someone rearranging pieces on a board he no longer played. Carrie heard him before she saw him and waited at the top of the stairs like a student called to the principal's office. He packed neatly, pulling the hangers down like pages from a chapter he had already reread too many times. "I'm not here to punish you," he said as he zipped the suitcase. "But I need to be somewhere that isn't trying to look like healing. I need actual healing." She nodded, more hurt than she admitted. "So, we're really—" she began, but didn't finish. Ethan didn't answer directly. Instead, he placed his wedding band on the dresser, not with drama, but like someone leaving behind keys to a place they no longer lived in. "Without real repair, there's no we," he said. "Not cruel, just clear." Carrie didn't follow him out. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the click of the door. She didn't cry. The silence was no longer shocking. It was just the new sound of her life. In the days that followed, Carrie felt the shape of absence in ways she hadn't understood before. It wasn't just Ethan's missing toothbrush or the paused subscription emails from brands she'd lost. It was the space around everything, the echoes, the weightless corners of her digital life. The group chats that hadn't lit up in days, the comments section not angry anymore, just quiet, no applause, no engagement, no noise to tell her who to be. It was like standing in a room where the walls used to be made of mirrors and suddenly finding them all gone. For the first time, she faced herself without a script. She tried to write something meaningful, but deleted every draft. Words that used to land with force now felt thin, like dressing wounds she hadn't yet cleaned. The world wasn't waiting for her next move. And in that disinterest, there was something painfully honest. She no longer owned the narrative. She wasn't the protagonist, and if she ever wanted to be part of something again, it would have to be on someone else's terms. Zora, meanwhile, noticed the changes without being told. The books from the envelope appeared on her nightstand with no explanation. The one with quotes smelled faintly of Eleanor's perfume, though neither of them spoke about it. At school, she said little, but when a classmate dropped her binder and muttered a quick "sorry," Zora helped pick it up without flinching. That afternoon, Coach Rivera pulled her aside and asked if she'd like to lead the next meeting for the diversity group. Zora blinked. "Why me?" Rivera smiled. "Because you know how it feels to have something taken, and because you know how to give something back, even if it's just space." Zora didn't answer. But that night she opened one of the books and read aloud to her mother while Angela folded laundry. Her voice was steadier now, not loud. Not trying to prove anything, just there, clear enough to take root. Angela didn't interrupt. She didn't add commentary, she just listened, smiling into the cotton and letting her daughter speak uninterrupted. Back in Westport, Carrie sat on the kitchen stool where she once planned content calendars and decided how to light her apologies. Now, the space had no stage. She didn't film. She didn't tweet. She sat with a pen in her hand and a piece of paper that would not be posted. On it she wrote, "What remains when the audience leaves? Who am I if I am not seen?" She didn't answer those questions. She folded the paper and tucked it into her drawer. Eleanor's voice lingered. "Admitting isn't dying. It's being born again." Carrie didn't know yet if she was ready to be reborn, but she had stopped pretending she hadn't died a little. The silence was no longer an enemy. It was her syllabus. A curriculum that couldn't be sponsored, a path with no brand deals, no monetized milestones, just questions, just space. And maybe one day the courage to bridge it. On the day of the agreement, the conference room felt less like a place of negotiation and more like a crucible. The contract sat in the middle of the table, pages crisp, corners sharp, the text clear and unapologetic. Carrie read the terms again, even though she had already memorized them the night before. Her lawyer, a polished man in an expensive suit, leaned over and murmured, "We can challenge this. It's excessive. You're not a criminal." But Angela, seated directly across from them, didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply responded, "It's not excessive, it's the bare minimum." Her voice carried a quiet authority that made the lawyer pause, unsure whether to reply or defer. Carrie didn't look at her yet. She stared instead at her own reflection on the tabletop, distorted slightly, like someone she used to be. The silence held tight until the mediator cleared her throat gently and read aloud the core terms again. A public apology with no monetization, full scholarships for black students at the school, an annual education initiative focused on identity and natural hair, direct funding for local salons and community educators, and a full year of anonymous volunteer work. Carrie swallowed hard. The silence didn't offer her comfort, only the weight of responsibility. Zora arrived just before the signing, wearing the blue scarf. It was tied tighter today, more confidently, the fabric resting like a quiet declaration. She didn't speak immediately. She simply sat beside her mother and looked at Carrie, not with fury, not with pity, but with eyes that demanded clarity. It wasn't hatred in that gaze, it was the demand to be seen properly, wholly, not as a backdrop or a lesson in a caption. For Carrie, that stare carried more weight than any clause in the agreement. It said, "I'm not yours to fix, and I was never yours to use." The words never passed Zora's lips, but they didn't have to. Carrie felt them settle into her skin like ink. Eleanor sat nearby, hands resting over her purse to hide the slight tremble in her fingers, but her presence was steady. It anchored the room in something older, something moral. Ethan remained standing, arms folded loosely, his posture rigid but not hostile. He didn't offer comfort or distance. He simply existed in the space, watching whether Carrie would finally act without being watched. Zora finally asked one question. "Do you know why it hurt?" Carrie's answer didn't come. Not yet. The attorney tapped his pen, whispering about reputational damage, future deals, possible modifications. But Carrie wasn't listening anymore. Her focus had narrowed to Zora's face, to Angela's stillness, to Eleanor's quiet encouragement, and to Ethan's silence, which no longer felt like absence, but like a demand for something real. The document, to Carrie, looked less like punishment and more like a mirror. Every clause, every demand reflected what she had failed to understand, that impact matters more than intent, and that healing could not begin until she stopped narrating her redemption. Her fingers hovered above the pen, and for a brief moment she imagined what would happen if she walked away, if she claimed victimhood, if she let her lawyer speak for her, if she capitalized on exhaustion. But then she heard Angela's voice again. It's the minimum. Not a threat, a truth. Zora was no longer the quiet child on the stool. She was watching, alert, steady and unflinching. If Carrie signed, it had to be for real. And if she didn't, well, then every moment since that brunch would have meant nothing. Carrie reached for the pen slowly, as if testing the weight of her own agency. She didn't rush. She didn't ask for permission. The attorney looked ready to interject, but she gave him a look that silenced him. "I'll sign," she said, softly but clearly. "Not because it's strategic, because it's right." It was the first time in weeks her words weren't rehearsed. She pressed the pen to the paper, and with each stroke of her signature, something in her chest loosened. Not relief, not closure, but the first breath of an unfamiliar kind of honesty. The room stayed quiet. Even the mediator didn't move. When the final line was crossed, Carrie set the pen down gently. She didn't look up. She didn't perform. She simply exhaled. Zora blinked once, as if acknowledging a shift too subtle for applause. Angela didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed. For the first time, Carrie felt like she wasn't the center of the room, and that was exactly how it should be. Eleanor reached across the table and touched her daughter-in-law's hand. "You just chose," she whispered, "and that choice may be the only thing they remember." Carrie nodded slightly, eyes wet but unbroken. Ethan didn't say anything, but something in his stance softened. He didn't step closer, but he didn't step away either. It was a beginning, but not of a reunion, of accountability, of reconstruction. The lawyer looked at the signed document, then at Carrie, confused by her stillness. "Do you want to say anything to the press?" he asked, too used to spinning. Carrie shook her head. "Let them read it in action," she replied. Zora folded her scarf tighter. Carrie noticed the stitches along the edge, names, initials, fragments of care, and wondered what it would take to earn even one thread of that fabric. But she didn't ask. She stood slowly, thanked the mediator, and stepped back, not out of shame, but out of the spotlight. For once, she had no plan for what came next, only the knowledge that this, whatever it was not hers to control. As she walked out of the room, the sound of her footsteps echoed softer than usual. Not because of the acoustics, but because she had stopped trying to make them echo. Angela gathered the papers into a neat stack, handed them to the mediator, and stood. She didn't offer forgiveness. She offered finality. Zora followed, eyes steady, steps firm. Eleanor lingered just a moment longer, then touched the back of Carrie's shoulder before leaving. Ethan held the door open. He didn't speak, but he waited. Carrie was the last to leave. Behind her, the contract rested signed and sealed. The scratch of the pen still echoed in her mind, not sharp like the buzzing of the clippers, not brutal like forced laughter, but steady, clean, and unmistakably hers. Months had passed, but the air inside the school gym buzzed with a kind of joy that felt earned, not scheduled. The Natural Hair Festival was in full swing, not as a trend or response, but as a rooted celebration. The scent of shea butter and hairspray lingered in the corners, but what took up the real space were the voices, stories being told by the women who lived them, laughter that didn't check itself at the door. Neighborhood braiders worked their magic on makeshift booths, while an old projector clicked through a series of portraits, children in puffs, women with locks, teens reclaiming the parts of themselves they were once told to tame. The captions beneath the images weren't poetic, they were real. "This is how I learned my hair was not a problem. I used to hide under hats. My curls are mine." In the crowd, Angela stood with her arms crossed, not defensively but to keep from crying. She spotted Eleanor first, who offered a nod, and then Ethan, whose presence had become quiet but consistent. Carrie, noticeably absent from the spotlight, moved boxes behind the booths, dressed in jeans and a staff t-shirt, blending in, not forgotten, but unseen on purpose. Zora waited backstage, her foot tapping a rhythm that only she understood. Her hair was free today, voluminous coils arranged like a halo around her head. The blue scarf now wrapped loosely around her neck, no longer a shield, but a symbol. Angela had offered to help her write a speech, but Zora had declined. "I'll know what to say when I get there," she'd said. And now, as her name was called, she inhaled deeply and walked out into the light. The applause was instant, but not overwhelming. It was warm, familiar. She stepped to the mic, barely reaching it without adjustment, and leaned forward just slightly. "Hi," she began, voice soft but sure. "Thanks for being here. Not just today, just for staying." She smiled as the crowd leaned in. "That's all I wanted to say." The quiet that followed was the kind that made space, not noise. And then, like a wave, the clapping returned. No one pressed her to say more. No one needed a speech longer than that, because she had already said what mattered. From the sidelines, Carrie stood gripping the edge of a crate, watching her, not filming, not crafting a caption in her head, not imagining how it would play in the algorithm, just watching. For a long time, Carrie had been the kind of person who needed to be at the center of something to feel real. But here she was, entirely peripheral, and for the first time it didn't hurt. She moved cords out of the way for the next performer. She handed a headset to one of the organizers. When a girl knocked over a wig stand, Carrie helped pick it up and didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. Nobody asked her who she was, and that anonymity, once her greatest fear, now felt like shelter. She caught Ethan watching her from across the gym, his hands in his pockets, a half smile on his face. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't anything definitive. Just a recognition that sometimes stepping back is the only step that counts. Later, as the event wrapped and the last round of applause faded, Zora stepped off the stage, her shoes clicking softly against the painted gym floor. She moved with the ease of someone who had learned to carry herself without flinching, and as she rounded the corner toward the service hallway, she nearly collided with Carrie. They both paused, not in discomfort, but in surprise. Carrie started to step aside, but Zora didn't move. She looked up at the woman who had once cut her hair without consent and now stood small, silent, and unsure. "Hey," Zora said quietly. Carrie nodded, a reflex. "You did great," she offered, but Zora didn't respond to the compliment. She looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Thank you for listening." It wasn't a performative peace offering. It wasn't the kind of forgiveness Carrie could post. It was a crack in the wall, a window, a door left just slightly open. Carrie swallowed hard, blinking. "I'm still listening," she said. Zora nodded once, then walked past her without looking back. Carrie didn't follow. She stood still for a beat, then picked up the crate she'd been carrying. No cameras followed her into the corridor. No brand asked for a quote. The hallway was just a hallway again, and in that ordinary stretch of linoleum, something extraordinary had happened. Not redemption, not resolution, but recognition. Carrie hadn't fixed anything. She hadn't earned applause. What she had earned was a chance to stay in the room without owning it. And for her, that was a beginning she hadn't known how to ask for. Outside, the sun had begun to dip. People spilled onto the lawn, some still in costume, others holding printed programs, most unaware of the small exchange that had just taken place in a forgotten corner of the building. But that was the point. The world didn't need to know. Not everything had to be shared. Zora found Angela waiting by the curb, and as they walked to the car, Eleanor fell into step beside them. Ethan stayed behind a few minutes, holding the door for volunteers. Carrie emerged last, stepping out not as the host, not as the face of anything, but simply as someone learning how to walk through the world without shaping it around her reflection. The gym emptied, the stage dimmed, but a lesson had taken root, one that didn't need hashtags or lights to grow. It lived in gestures, in silences, in learning when to let others speak and how to truly applaud. We put our hearts into every detail of this story, not just to tell it, but to connect with you. If this journey moved you in any way, please consider subscribing to our channel. It's your support that helps us bring more stories like this to life. Stories that aren't rushed, but carefully crafted over days to honor real emotions and reflection. We'd love to hear what this story meant to you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if it stayed with you, take a moment to explore the other stories waiting here for you. Thank you for being part of this with us. We're not just sharing stories, we're building a space where every voice matters.